Hi, I'm Linda Davis, a member of Anna Aspanis' creative team. Eula May, another creative team member, posted a wonderful tutorial on creating a sketch with a cityscape photo last week. I don't photograph many city streets. I photograph primarily landscapes, flowers, and people, especially little people. However, I wanted to try her technique with one of my own photos, but after following the tutorial, I realized that for my photo, I'd need to make some adjustments to the settings that Eula May used for her photo in order to get the results that I wanted. And since some of you use Photoshop Elements, which doesn't support smart objects, I thought I'd share my experience going through Eula May's tutorial both with smart objects and without them. As I begin, thank you, Eula May, for sharing your technique. It's great. And thank you, Anna, for supporting and encouraging us to experiment. For those of you using a version of Photoshop, I am not capable of explaining the technical stuff about a smart object, so we can skip that. I can share what I do with them and a limitation that I have discovered. There are two ways to access or turn on smart objects. One way is to go up into your preferences, General. There's a line that reads, Always create smart objects when placing. I'm going to check that box and show you what I'm talking about. If I go to my Finder and I drag over, say, a transfer onto my new blank document, and I press return, if you look at my layers panel, you'll see a little icon in the corner of the thumbnail indicating this is a smart object. However, if I have another PSD file open, say the Artsy transfers, multi-layered, and I move those over, they weren't smart objects initially, they don't come over as smart objects. If I want to change one of the layers to a smart object, I press Control, and from the pop-up menu I choose Convert to Smart Object. And then you can see that it too has that little icon indicating it's a smart object thumbnail on this, it's a smart object on this layer. Now I'm going to close this. I'm not going to save it. This is my file the first time I went through with my photo, and I used smart objects and attached smart filters to them. And there are two reasons why I like to use smart objects. First, they're useful for protecting an image when I attach a mask to it. I don't know how many times I've mistakenly used a brush on a photo layer rather than the mask. Then I have to go back in the history panel, but if I've gone too far, I have to start all over with a new file. Well, one of the things that Photoshop does is it protects that image. If I press B for the brush panel, I get a little dialog box that says this smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. In other words, I cannot do anything to that file. Well, I like this little reminder telling me to go back to the mask. Smart objects are also very useful when I'm experimenting with filters because I can make changes by clicking on the smart filter. For instance, if I go up here to the glowing edges, it takes me right back in the filter panel to the same panel where I made my initial settings. I'm not going to change anything now, but I like that feature. Takes me right back to the panel. And you can see how handy that would be. There's one other little icon that allows you to make additional adjustments to the smart filter. If I double click this, I can change the blend mode on the smart filter itself. And in this case, I didn't change the blend mode, but I changed the opacity. So that's very handy. However, I have learned over time that if you have a lot of layers as smart objects with smart filters attached, it can slow things down within Photoshop. For example, when I resize several layers of a photo with smart filters applied, the look I created with the smart filters will disappear until I've finished resizing. I'll get a little dialog box while Photoshop is working telling me that's what's happening. And it isn't the smart objects themselves that slow things down for me, rather it's the smart filters that are attached. So to keep file size down, I generally create a composite of my work by pressing the keys Command or Control on a PC plus Option or Alt plus Shift plus E. With that caveat, do I still use smart filters, smart objects and filters? Yes. When I'm experimenting, I will use smart objects and filters. I like the flexibility to make changes without it affecting my layer. It's the same reason I prefer adding an adjustment layer from this panel, like hue saturation or exposure or black and white, rather than going up to the menu bar and choosing adjustments here. If I make the adjustment here, it's permanent. But if I have an adjustment layer, then it works. I have a lot more flexibility in being able to go back and make some changes. Now I'm going to close my property panel because we don't need to see that now, and I'm going to close this because I would like to share my process going through without the smart filters. Now you can see the two files. This is the one in which I use smart objects and attach smart filters to the photo. This is the same photo, but this time I did not use any smart objects or smart filters, but you can see they look essentially the same. There really isn't any significant difference. So let's walk through what I did, and I'm going to pull this file up just so we can see the one. Now that's my composite. I'm going to turn that off, and I have just my original. Eula May made about six copies of her background layer as she was going through the process. So I'm going to do Command J 6 times and just do it all at one time. But I'm going to turn off the top copies until I get to this copy. Now on the first copy, we were to have it black and white with color dodge, inverted, and a blur. So let's try that. I'm going to use an adjustment layer to convert it to black and white. I'm going to choose the same one Eula May did. I'm not going to change anything in the properties on the black and white layer. I'm just going to leave it as it is, so I'm leaving it that way. The next thing I was supposed to do was to change the layer to blend mode color dodge. I can do that by coming up to the drop down menu and choosing color dodge, or I can press Option Shift D and it will change. The next step was to invert the file, and I do that with a keyboard shortcut Command I. Finally, for this layer I need to add a blur, and I go up to the blur, Gaussian blur, and I chose 2.5, and you can see my sketch coming in. This is really going to depend on the look you want and your photo. Okay, let's go to the next step. For this layer, I am to go to the filter gallery, and under sketch there's something called photocopy. These were the settings that I used. I'm not going to change them, but you can see how you could adjust it and play with it. This is photocopy on multiply. Now I need to change the blend mode to multiply. I can go back up to the drop down menu, or I can use the keyboard shortcut Option Shift M. Then we were to duplicate it. I just pressed Command J so I would have it duplicated. On the next layer we are to use Find Edges. Now this tool has a mind of its own. What it does is what it does. You really don't have any options on making any changes or adjustments the way you did with some of the things in the filter gallery. So I'm just going to select Find Edges and let it do its thing. But we changed the blend mode to multiply again. I'm going to do that by pressing Option Shift M. And on this layer I am going to reduce the opacity. I'm just going to use the number keys, and I'm going to put it at 75%. Okay? This next layer is where I deviated from a little from Eula May's instructions. She used a darken blend mode. Well, when I went up to try darken, it didn't seem like it was going to work. So I went back and looked, and I went to and tried vivid light. And I liked the look of that. It really gives it a sketch look. And to give it just a little more depth in the color, I added another layer, but this one on color burn at 25%. So this is color burn 25%. The top layer, this is where we go back to the filter gallery and we choose under stylize glowing edges. These are the settings. Eula May used 1 and her brightness 12, the same. I increased the smoothness to 15. So this is glowing edges. Now, to get it to look right, I go up to the drop-down menu for blend modes and I choose overlay, or I can use a keyboard shortcut, Option Shift O, and I get overlay. I also reduce this, I'm going to say about 80%. No, maybe 75. Okay. One of the last things that Eula May suggested was to use a hue and saturation adjustment layer, which I did. And you can see when I turned it off, when I turn it back on, it is a little bit warmer. Okay, you're just going to have to play with the adjustment layers. You might want to use a brightness adjustment or a curves adjustment. It's really going to depend on your photo. Because these layers do not have smart objects attached, I could drag them all over to a new blank document, but I prefer to create a composite instead. So of all the active layers, my originals I don't have on, this is only going to create a composite of what is turned on, the active layers. I'm going to press Command Option Shift E and I get my new composite. Before closing, I want to share just how versatile I think that this tutorial really is. I went back to my photo file and experimented first with the blend modes I use, and I've attached these to one of the simple photo blends masks that Anna sells in her store. This is my original photo. This is my first run through on the using Eula May's tutorial. Then I went back and played with those two blend mode layers. On this bottom left corner, I tried darken at 20% and vivid light at 50%, and you can see the difference that it makes. Everything else was exactly the same. It was just the blend modes that made the difference. And these are composites of what I did. This layer on the lower right is just a composite of the 3 bottom layers with the glowing edges to get just a sketch. And I can really see, I can envision, what I did here is I used a couple of light leaks, as you can see, set on different blend modes, but I can envision using just this sketch look with the with not only the light leaks, but also bringing color back in with the brushes. So this is a really versatile technique. If you play with it, depending on what your photo is, there are a lot of options that you can come up with. If you're new to digital scrapbooking, take your time. It'll come together as you continue to play with the filters. Don't let them overwhelm you. Learn to create just the basic sketch. Start at the bottom and then work your way up. Then add the photocopy sketch option. But remember, what you do really depends on your photo and the look you want to achieve. I know there are a lot of techniques for creating a sketch available. I shared another way to create a sketch and bring back color with brushes in a previous video. You might want to learn that technique as well so that you have more options to use as you create your pages. I feel like the more options I know well enough to use without having to look them up, the easier it is for me to create my scrapbook pages in Photoshop. Eula May, Anna, and I want to encourage you to take the time to experiment with Eula May's tutorial, whether you use Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. And if you have additional questions, please let Anna know at annaaspinus@yahoo.com. And one more thank you to Anna for her support and to Eula May for sharing her technique. I love it.